Spirituality is a big word. To some, it's a cringy philosophy of hippies. To others, it's religion without dogma. The dictionary calls it. To intellects, it's a never-ending point of discussion, trying to define what's ultimately undefinable. Our world is full of mystery, and yet somehow there's an order to the mystery, and maybe trying to live in accordance with that mystery is what spirituality is all about. And so I'm asking, what does the practical application of spirituality really look like? When it all feels so complex, what if it was simple? So let's imagine there's a 3-step process. Obviously, there's no step-by-step process to spirituality, but for the sake of this video and experiment, let's play with this. One second. I got a whiteboard. Let's imagine there's 3 steps, the 3 C's, and this isn't a straight line, but more of a circle or a triangle, a never-ending continual process. And before we keep going, one thing I was asking myself when I was making this was like, what's the point? What's the point of living a spiritual life at all? And in attempts to keep things simple, when I imagine someone who lives a spiritual life, who lives in accordance with this great mystery, I imagine someone who just has like a zest for life, someone who appreciates the world around them and the people around them, someone who's enthusiastic and someone who's inspired, wow. I mean, the word inspired literally comes from the word inspira, in spirit. So maybe that's enough. To live a spiritual life is to live an inspired life. All right, let's go back to the whiteboard. It's really fun. Okay, so the first step of this 3-step process, the first C is center. Centering ourselves is, I think, at the core of what it means to live a spiritual life. There's so much time spent in the mind and in the motion of things that it is common to completely lose touch with who are we at our center, who are we at our core. I think of this as like we're kind of these boats out at sea, and all the wind and all the waves is just kind of throwing us in all these different directions. We're kind of just like, shit, like I'm fucking just a passenger to life. But the process of finding our core is like dropping an anchor down. Circumstance and waves and winds can still come, but we're grounded. We have an anchor. So the process of centering is, in my belief, at the core of what it means to live a spiritual life. It is finding our essence and who we are behind the action, behind the doing. And practically what this might look like is developing the habit of sitting with ourselves in silence every single day. Alan Watts has this quote, "Muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone." So what is the way to center ourselves? What is the way to kind of calm the anxious, doing, action-oriented mind? It's by leaving it alone. It's by sitting and doing nothing. And whether that is 5 minutes a day or 20 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day, the more the better. But at first, this is like one of the most difficult things one can do. It's so simple. It's the most simple practice one could do, is just sit and do nothing. But it's the most difficult because it is counterintuitive to the entire way that culture operates. It is counterintuitive to the way the anxious mind thinks we should go solve our problems. The anxious mind is like, I don't have time to sit. I have to go act. The paradox in that is, if we never sit, if we never actually have a center about ourselves, every action we take is coming from this ungrounded, unrooted, anchored place. And paradoxically, if we take the time to do nothing and to just sit and breathe and be with ourselves and develop this relationship with this unspoken part of ourselves, over time, we begin to know ourselves. Who are we really? And then everything we do in life, every action we then take is coming from this more anchored and centered place. And then our life then begins to reflect somebody who knows their core, who knows their center. So this is the first step of the spiritual life, and it feels like the most important one. The second step, the second C, is curiosity. This is a really fun, simple part of the process. It's just becoming curious, becoming childlike again, seeing where that leads, and trusting that this core essence part of ourselves, the wiser part of ourselves, knows something we don't know. And it's just pulling us along, breadcrumb by breadcrumb. It might just be pulling us to the smoothie shop so that we then see the sign that pulls us there, then it pulls us there. Become curious. Become curious of where you're drawn to, what captivates your interests, and allow that to guide you along your way. And I think at its core, this is kind of like developing a relationship with our inner child. If you think of the little kid version of ourselves, they're just so pure and playful and curious. They just kind of go after what they want, and they become interested or obsessed with something, and they don't need anybody telling them it's a good idea. They just do it. And they're just engaging with the world in a really passionate, spirit-filled way. it's all about removing the labels and judgments as to, well, should I do that or shouldn't I do that? Or is that silly? Or is that productive? Is that a smart use of my time? Like really just removing that, allowing our curiosities and interests to guide us and just trusting where that leads. I really like the Julia Cameron Artist Way school of thought. So a couple ways to implement like how to develop a better relationship with our curiosity. I think first is journaling. Journaling is such an easy way to kind of get our thoughts out of our head and onto paper. And it's sometimes easier to objectify our own interests and curiosities when they're not in our head and they're on paper. So spending a little time every day, kind of just stream of consciousness, writing what's on your mind and what you're feeling interested in and what feels fun and what sounds playful and what you might want to try. And then another thing that Julia Cameron recommends, which I love, is weekly dates with yourself. So take yourself on a date every week and make it kind of like you're taking this little kid version of yourself out on a date. Maybe one week you go to a bookstore and just like look at books. Maybe you go get a smoothie and take a walk, whatever sounds light and playful and fun, and allow that little kid part of you to kind of take the front seat for a little bit. Like for me, one of my favorite things to do is come out with my camera and let my little kid just like play. As I develop that relationship with that curious childlike part of myself, his voice becomes louder. As I begin to develop that curiosity muscle, it becomes easier to really hear and feel when I'm really curious or when I'm really pulled. So this is a muscle and a language and a conversation we're trying to develop with our own innate inner curiosity. As we develop a relationship with that part of ourselves, it becomes louder. It begins to lead us along our way. And the last step, the last C of this process is courage. So the more we center ourselves, the more we become curious, the more we're inherently going to be called into the unknown. We're going to be guided to do things that we haven't done before. We're going to be guided to start acting differently, because that's what happens when you become more connected to yourself and you become more curious. You're just going to start doing things a little differently. And eventually that doing things differently is going to guide you into the unknown. And that unknown is going to be very scary. The unknown is where all of our fears exist. All of our projections of all the worst things that could happen to us, all the human fears of I won't be okay, live in the unknown. And that's why it is the final piece of this puzzle, because without courage, this process stops. This circular, never-ending process is jammed. If we're unwilling to enter the unknown, the spiritual path of being inspired, ultimately stops, because we're ultimately saying to life, no, I'm unwilling. I'm unwilling to step forward into the unknown. I don't have faith in the unknown. I can speak on experience. I've gone like a year plus in my life where there was something I was called to do and I said, no, I'm too scared. That was the year of my life where I felt so disconnected from this like great mystery, this spiritual world of nature and the universe and God. Like I felt so disconnected. And really it's because when we're not acting courageously, we're cutting off that connection. We're saying, no, I don't trust you, unknown. And so we can center ourselves, we can become curious, but if we're not willing to be courageous in those curiosities, the process ends. Maya Angelou has this amazing quote. She says, courage is the most important of all virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You can practice any virtue erratically, but nothing consistently without courage. So to live spiritually, to live inspired, to live in spirit, is to live courageously, because ultimately you're going to be called to continuously step into the unknown. To step into the unknown is inherently a courageous thing to do. And so making this more practical, again, journaling, just simply journaling on the question, where am I being invited to soften into courage? Where in my life do I feel called to do something that scares me? And how can I soften into that by giving myself compassion, showing myself grace, like I understand it's scary, like I know you're fearful, and really like work with my fears as if they're like this little kid part of myself again, and start to inch my way towards that courageous action. And it usually is simple things like I need to have a hard conversation with this person. I need to step away from this behavior. For me, stepping away from particular limiting behaviors is often where my courage is required. And so courage is really, again, it's always our bridge into the unknown. That bridge is scary because in the unknown is everything that could go wrong, but it's also just like everything that could go right. And if we choose to trust this great organizing force around us, I like to believe that courage is always my bridge into new life. It's like my initiation into getting gifts and magic and mystery and beautiful things. And again, this process is infinite. It circles and it triangulates forever as we begin to center ourselves more and more, Our curiosities develop. We get pulled in certain directions. As we get pulled in certain directions, we're going to need to deploy courage. The more we act courageously, the more we find ourselves in new and beautiful situations. Life begins to show new things to us. As life gives us new things and new data, we center ourselves in a whole new way of being. We center ourselves in a new kind of hemisphere. As we continue to, it continues on and on. I truly believe if I followed this 3-step framework for the rest of my life, I would be living in accordance with my deeply held values of living a devotional, spiritual, inspired life. Yeah, this video is kind of my invitation to do that. So let me know if this resonates with you. I hope these ideas made sense. See you soon.